Let 'Em Go Barefoot is a podcast that dives into all things parenting and education through the lens of mindful awareness. Conversations aim to bring forward patterns, beliefs, and attitudes that shape our expectations and ideas about what it means to raise healthy children. With a blend of science, ancient wisdom, and intuition, we will explore ways to support, nurture, and connect with our growing children while also nurturing and expanding ourselves. I am grateful you are here. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Let 'Em Go Barefoot podcast. Today, I am talking to Dr. Robyn Koslowitz. Robyn is a psychologist. Yes. And she also hosts a podcast called Post-Traumatic Parenting, which I find very fascinating. She has interviewed a lot of very interesting guests, and I want to dive into her work and talk about a variety of things related to parenting, raising children, and healing ourselves. So welcome, Dr. Koslowitz. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I feel like our interactions on social media, we have so much in common in terms of how we think about children that I'm really excited for our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, let's dive right into it because the first question I kind of want to know about is really, what is trauma?
So it's so interesting because so many people ask me this. And I think the reason that people ask is because the term itself has become so contested nowadays, where people, say it's overused or what we're saying is traumatic isn't, that I just want to honor for people who feel like, I think I was traumatized. Don't let that discourse let you doubt yourself. So trauma is just about if any experience you've had that was too big for your brain to metabolize. Like if you had an experience and you're going like, how could this be? Like what just happened? Everything that I know about myself and the world and a sense of safety, it's gone. Congratulations, you were traumatized. Because that's what a traumatic experience is. And that doesn't mean that you're damaged forever. And it doesn't mean that it can't be worked with. But trauma is just that instance of psychological wound that is too big. It's not a bruise. It's a cut, right? It's an actual wound.
Mm-hmm. There are so many people who will have pretty much the exact same experience, and then they'll walk away with completely different feelings about it. And so that goes back to what you described as it's too big for you psychologically. So one person may have some tools already in place and may already feel grounded and have a foundational sort of safety net, if you will, that when they come up against something that's really intense, they might not have a traumatic experience about it, whereas somebody else may because of a lot of other various reasons in their backstory. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. And I think it's sometimes it's not what happens, it's who it happens to and when in their life story it happens. Because there are people who have temperaments that, a situation that someone else finds, challenging, they actually thrive on. And there are people who something that other people find tolerable, it's stressful but tolerable, is absolutely overwhelming for them, maybe because of other supports that aren't there, or maybe because they're uniquely neurologically not cut out for it. But no one gets to help you. No one gets to get you to doubt your experience of your experience. If it felt traumatic, it likely was.
Right. Okay. That's wonderful. So let's veer off into the parenting side of all of this, because many of the people who listen to this podcast are parents and have young children. And so many are also dealing with their own past traumas and past story that they are working through it as they are parenting. And children have an amazing way of pushing all of our buttons
Mm-hmm.
and helping us dig up maybe some things that we didn't even realize we needed to address. So how do you advise families and parents to who are aware and want to make a shift and know that there's something that they need to do or work on? Like, where do you start there?
So the first thing is, I think I wrote the book that I would have needed when I became a mom. I have full-blown PTSD. And I knew when I became a mom that it has to be that my flashbacks and my panic attacks are going to affect my baby, because how could they not? Parenting is so embodied and it's so much about attunement and presence and, sharing your calm and being and co-regulating. And I knew that my all of that wasn't working very well for me because I had PTSD. But, 26 years ago when I became a mom and I, went to the library because that's what we do as researchers.
Mhm.
We go to the library for answers. There was no research. I don't even know if like, The Body Keeps the Score was out yet. What I mean, that book is kind of controversial, but at least it opened everybody's eyes to the idea that there's this thing called trauma. And actually, it's not just like, oh, I went through this, but it made me tougher. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger kind of thing. What doesn't kill you leaves you with some scars and some damage. And you got to
Mhm.
do something about that. So we didn't know this. And there literally was nothing. There was no research. And I realized eventually it took me time on a journey that I would be the one who would have to write that book because there was no book. So that was my entry into post traumatic parenting. And then I started the community because there are so many parents who do this, who, we have so much. One of the things that trauma leaves us with is this real legacy of self doubt and shame. And, like the Taylor Swift song, It's Me, I'm the problem, it's me. Like,
Mhm.
that's what trauma does. It makes you feel like it's me, I'm the problem, it's me all the time.
Mm.
And then you become a parent and you are the attachment figure. So you kind of are the problem,
Yeah.
right? Like in that sense, you like even just today, I actually I had a woman who owns a small business delivering a product I ordered from her to my house. And this woman had a preemie 7 months ago.
Mm.
And she's telling me about like, her struggles because she's been pumping a lot and now her baby's 7 months and she really wants to start nursing. And the way she said it, she's like, I think I missed the boat on nursing because now she really doesn't want to nurse. And now that her oral muscles are developed enough, and I said, can we notice your language for a second? I missed the boat. Sounds like the voice of shame, right? And this is not my patient. This is just like a woman and we're chit chatting. I said, for 7 months, you have been pumping with a
Mm.
preemie and getting her like oral motor therapy and OT and PT and all the therapies and all the developmental work that you've been doing to get this child to develop. Because when babies are born at 3 pounds, all that development has to happen outside the womb. And this one thing that's not working successfully, you didn't miss the boat. The boat may have passed you by. Like it's true. Your baby may not, like the neural pathways may not be established enough for her to learn how to nurse because of all the therapies she's had and all the birth, trauma and everything that happened to this baby. It may not work out, not because you missed the
Mhm.
boat though, but we do this,
Yeah.
right?
That's a really great reframe too, that to be aware of the I language and the blame language that we put on ourselves. Like, I didn't do it in time, I didn't do it enough, I didn't do it better. And instead think about it in a bigger way, like scale back, or take the bird's eye view and look at everything and every part of the picture and consider
Yeah.
what you have done and the progress that you have made. I think that's a really important reframe. Well, you know, this is such a big topic. So
Yeah.
trying to fit it into an hour long conversation is challenging. But I do feel like there's so many pieces that are profound that we can highlight to help families connect um, through their challenges and overcome them. And there's a lot of talk about resilience and what that means. And there's this a lot of conversation in the political arena of your feelings don't matter but facts do. And some of that is absolutely accurate and it's true. We want to look at the facts, what is actually happening in this particular situation versus the story I'm telling myself. So can you talk to us about maybe steps you can take in the midst of sort of an overwhelming experience when your nervous system is all agitated and excited, and instead of allowing your mind to kind of wander off or run off into like a catastrophizing pathway, what can you do? Like, how can you sort of slow things down a little bit?
So the first thing you have to know about trauma is that when you're talking about like how do we handle it, is this idea that when we're traumatized, I believe our brain creates this thing I call a trauma app. And the trauma app is your brain's attempt to create an operating principle that allows you to function and go on, right? Because we all walk around life with like an illusion of safety as though everything's fine, but trauma really pierces that.
Mm.
So then the trauma app is born, and the trauma app sort of becomes this sort of program in your brain that says, if X, then Y. So, for example, let's say somebody who's been bullied or who's been, raised with a very critical parent. So maybe it's like, if someone might be judging me, I people please.
Mm.
So if X, then Y. If X, then Y. Um, so if that's the situation, right? What happens is growing up, if you've been traumatized as a child, you have this trauma app and you have these coping tools for stress or for trauma, and they work until you have kids. Because if you're a people pleaser, right, and and you have a boss who like will habitually say, "Oh, I need you to stay an extra hour today," or whatever demands they put on you, then if you say yes to your boss, you're saying no to your kids because you're not coming home on time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So suddenly that coping tool falls apart.
Mm.
If you're somebody who there's so many of them, right? Somebody who's always perfect, or somebody who dissociates a lot. When I feel stressed, I dissociate. Okay, that's not really that doesn't really work with toddlers, right? Because you can't just space out.
Yeah.
They need your presence, right? So what happens is now you have a stress, but your go-to coping tool that you've been rehearsing for like 20 years is one you can't use. So it's not that like life becomes more stressful. It's like you've been practicing this one tool and now you can't use it. So
Mm.
now what?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard because like now you have 3 kids and you have to suddenly learn stress management tools, and the 3 kids have their own stressors. Excuse me. They have their own stressors in their own life, and we have to sort of balance that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like first acknowledging that,
Yeah.
like my stressors are, you know, I need a new coping tool. I need to learn how to self-regulate myself in order to co-regulate with my kids. I need to learn how to feel stress but not dissociate and not people please
Mm-hmm.
and not do things perfectly,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? To free myself up to be a parent. And there are skills, right? We can learn. There's so many, right? We can learn deep breathing, and we can journal, and we can learn progressive muscle relaxation, all the things that therapists tell you to do that everybody rolls their eyes and are just like, yeah, 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 breathing. Yeah, 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 dangling in my chair and then stiffening my muscles. But you know what? I do that too. As a therapist, I teach those things, but sometimes in my own life, I'm like, yeah, yeah, I could breathe. But then when I'm like, no, I'm going to actually breathe through this right now because I really can, it works.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. We use a little tool in our family have over the years where if your mind is kind of getting away from you and you're feeling a little overwhelmed, just start humming or
Yeah.
singing a song because,
Mhm.
your mind can't it's a competition, right? You got to get to change that script in your head and that voice in your head. So humming is also, calms your nervous system too. So yeah, that's been one of our little go-tos. Like, are you getting a little too worked up? Start humming, sing a song, or take a walk. All the things that you can do to get your mind in a more positive, sort of a more positive spin on things, or just to slow things down. When you're talking about the parents who have dealt with some pretty heavy stuff before having children and how that all comes forward, I feel like in the social media time that we're in and also just parenting circles, there's a lot of conversation about helping our kids. Our children are
Yeah.
important and we want to do our best. We want to do everything we can in a way that was different maybe than we were raised in order to provide something better for our children. And sometimes with that comes a lot of anxiety, additional anxiety to already an
Yeah.
anxious situation. And so I tend to I like to try to go down to foundational pieces. Like, what are some foundational things that even a parent who feels like they are the most incapable are capable of doing?
So I love what you're saying. First of all, I really love what you said about like, interrupting that story you tell yourself by singing it. It's true because you recruit other areas of your brain. It's actually one of the things I do with conflict resolution in families is like we're gonna have a conversation about the problem, but everyone has to sing or everyone has to rhyme, you know,
Yeah.
just because it makes it silly and fun, and
Hmm.
also it interrupts that reactivity in your brain, or you
Yes.
can't use a certain word, you can't say and or something. automatically.
It kind of puts your defenses down too, right? Because you start bringing joy and silliness into it, and yeah, it changes the direction that things could go.
Yeah. But in terms of, first of all, in terms of that anxiety, I feel like parents, it's so hard. Parenting is like this endless to-do list, right? There's just so much to do. When you also have this endless to-don't list, don't yell like my mom did, don't make them responsible for my emotions, don't create a tense atmosphere in the home, don't explode, right? Like it's really hard, right? Because normally the way the attachment system is supposed to work is we have this, like, if it works well, we have secure attachment, and then we get this internal working model of ourselves and the world, but also of parenting. So when you don't have that internal working model, then you're constantly juggling the to-dos and the to-don'ts and the to-dos and the to-don'ts. But when we start really accepting that our kids want us,
Mm,
present, imperfect us, more than they want somebody who's doing everything right and someone who follows all the parenting scripts and who does everything, exactly as somebody shows it on their Instagram feed, the more the more self-accepting we become. And
mm,
also, I think for most parents, I think, and this especially for post-traumatic parents, really focusing on the idea that it's not about the rupture, it's about the repair. Like you're going to have ruptures, you're going to get it wrong, you're going to explode over something silly. Like things will happen sometimes. If you have that real acceptance of that, which in my book I have a model, I call it the A model, and A is acceptance. Like you have to accept that you did this thing. You wish you hadn't, but you did. And then sort of being able to say to the child, I let my big emotions get too big and I let my voice get big too, and that wasn't okay. I'm sorry.
yeah.
And have a conversation with the child without making it their fault. I wouldn't have yelled,
Hmm.
because they don't have to forgive us, right? It's not about that. It's about me taking responsibility. I wouldn't have yelled if you wouldn't have been so loud, overwhelming or difficult, whatever. No, that's my actions are my responsibility because I'm the grown up here. Because I want to teach that too to my kid, right? That eventually we take responsibility for our actions. But I have to take responsibility for that. No matter what you were doing, I should not have let my voice get so big. And then having that troubleshooting conversation. So, what should we do next time when we're really late and you don't want to put on your shoes, but I know we have to get into the car?
Hmm.
What should we do? How should we handle it
Hmm.
next time? Should we have a code word? Should we, you tell me. Let's figure this out together. Right. And they could be two separate conversations. But when you know that you don't have to be perfect, because if you're not perfect, which you're not going to be, you can fix it. And that actually that's not a bug, it's a feature of the system, right? Like rupture and repair is how relationships grow. And right, think about a muscle. The
Hmm.
more you exercise a muscle, the stronger it gets because the muscle rips a little and then more muscle fiber is secreted and then the muscle grows. So you
Yeah.
actually want micro ruptures. You're not going out of your way to create them because life will do that for you. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's fine. I would never tell a parent like put your kid through that so that you can repair with them, but like it's gonna happen. And then you repair it, that actually makes the relationship better. But so many post-traumatic parents are like, I don't want my kid to ever feel the way I felt. So I'm gonna be this perfect parent and they're never gonna have that. But like your kid isn't you, your kid has you.
Mm, that's powerful. Yeah, I like
Right?
that.
It's
Hmm.
crucial. It's a crucial
Yeah, yeah.
difference.
Because we do that, right? We think about all the things that happened to us, and we think about our own upbringing, and we bring that forward and almost like put it onto our children unconsciously a lot of the times, like if maybe we were yelled at as a kid because we got really loud inside the house and our parent just couldn't stand the loud noise, and if we were being boisterous as children, then it was just like, a, a blow up with the parents. You may look at your kid and almost not encourage them to be loud, but in a way, go out of your way to make it okay for them to be that way. I mean, that might not be a great example, but what I'm trying to say is like I think sometimes we take our past and we put it on our children accidentally.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we have an idea in psychology that sometimes doing the opposite is doing the same
mm,
thing, right? Because if let's say you make it okay for your kid to be loud whenever they want to, but the world has some demands and there are spaces where they can't
yeah,
be loud, but you're afraid to ever teach them the idea of like There's an indoor voice, there's an outdoor voice, there's a library voice, there's a museum voice, right? Like if you're not comfortable teaching them that, you're also not helping them.
Perfect. Yes, that's
Or
exactly
or
what I'm
or
talking about. Yeah.
right, like you're scared because it's not about the loudness or the not loudness, it's about the balance and the communication,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So like if your parent had said to you, "I have a really bad headache. It's not you, but can you take that loud playing outside?" As opposed to like I'm thinking of like many, many parents in the post-traumatic parenting community who were children of functional alcoholics
Okay.
who, would get those messages of like, you're too loud, you're too aggressive, you're too noisy, you're too demanding. Really, it was like, mommy has a hangover,
Yeah.
right? And, the mother would never admit to that because then they have to admit to the fact that, they're a functional alcoholic, which, is part of that disease. They're not
Mhm.
going to admit that, right? So it goes to the kid, you're too loud, but it's not really about the loudness. Because honestly, had mom just said, I have a headache, without explaining that it's a hangover, can you go play outside? It would have been fine.
Right. Right. Yeah. Just taking the ownership of it and also providing a solution that's sensible that the kid can actually obtain instead
Yeah.
of being so dramatic and requesting something that maybe is developmentally inappropriate for the child as well. So I think that does happen too, right? In the parenting situation or relationships in general and what we expect of our kids. Sometimes we expect them to do a lot more than they're capable of doing because they're still growing too. They're still developing. And like we said earlier on, I mean, they do push our buttons, but it's because they're still immature. They're still trying to understand how the world works. They're still trying to understand
Yeah.
themselves. So there might even be this belief that they're trying to do it on purpose, or
Yeah.
they know my buttons and they're just pushing them on purpose. And maybe
Yeah.
eventually it gets to that because they do get older and they get
Yeah.
smarter and they're realizing, I know who to go to ask this question, and I know who to go to ask this question. So maybe they do eventually figure that out, but especially in the beginning.
Right. Or it becomes a repeated pattern, and repeated patterns sort of get encoded into our brains. Our brains really like patterns.
Mm,
So it's like my go-to. This is what I do. I whine, and then mom yells at me, and then mom feels guilty, and then she gives me the thing I want, and it becomes this dance, right? And we just do it that way all the time. One of the things I like to say is our kids don't trigger us. Our kids reveal our triggers.
mm,
And it's such an important reframe because when people say to me, people come in with such self shame and like such self doubt, like, how could my kid trigger me? And she's 5. Like, what kind of a terrible person I am? And like, she's not triggering you, but you have a trauma app situation that you need to deal with about people pleasing or about people being too demanding. Sometimes in families where boundaries were really not respected, and then you have kids where boundaries are not supposed to be respected, right? Your 3-year-old should not care about the fact that you're busy with something else if he needs the bathroom right now
mm-hmm,
and he needs you to help him find the potty, right?
mm-hmm,
Like he shouldn't care that you're in the middle of a conversation because that's how the system's supposed to work. Your baby does not care in the middle of the night that you need your sleep because you had a hard day because it's 2 a.m. and they need a feed right now. And that's how it's supposed to work. But your stepmom should have cared when you were 15 and you had something really important in school and she made you stay home and clean or something so you couldn't go to your drama club practice or whatever. She should have cared, right?
mm-hmm.
Because you did have a right to that boundary when you were a child. So when your boundaries weren't accepted in childhood and your family of origin still doesn't respect your boundaries, then your kids' boundary crossings get really confusing because it's easy to get enraged at a child,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And that's so hard to navigate for parents because we do get enraged, right? More so than in any other situation. But you see how like easy it is to slip down the she knows this annoys me, but she's doing it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's not her job to manage my mood,
Right. Yes.
right?
So important. And it made me think how I love what you said about they reveal our triggers instead of they
Yeah.
they push your buttons and make you triggered. That's a great reframe. And when it comes to the developmental understanding of children, can you give us a guideline or some guides in terms of like what to think about as a parent of toddlers, and then what to think about in terms of expectations of their behavior and what they're capable of doing and understanding? And I know it's all kids are different. I know like one of my
Yeah.
firstborn talked very early, seem to understand things in a way that did not make sense for a 15-month-old to understand. So I know they're not all the same, but generally speaking, like, would you have some
Yeah.
sort of insights there?
Yeah, so what I like to think about, first of all, I really am a big fan of temperament work and like understanding that everybody's neurologically wired a little bit differently,
Mm.
but there are some predictable ways, right? Some babies are rhythmic, like they need to sleep and eat at relatively predictable times. Some babies are wildly not rhythmic, right? Some babies are cautious and slow to warm up, and some babies are very approachable. Some people are reactive, like things either get them mad or scared really fast. And some kids are relatively easygoing and unflappable. Some people need a lot of movement. Some people don't need as much movement. Some people are task persistent and like to get things done. And some people need a lot of stimulation and need to move from task to task to task. And neurological wiring is neurological wiring. You're born that way. You came that way out of the box. No one gets to tell you that there's a bad temperament or a good temperament because it's literally how you were programmed to be.
Mm.
Um, and there's nothing there with every temperament. There are situations that are really great for that temperament, and there are situations that aren't. Right? There are situations that you're an ideal fit for, and there are situations you're not an ideal fit for. And then we think of child development tasks like a baby is basically, and this is where I really like, Erickson's like stage theory, as old fashioned as it is,
Yeah.
not so much. I don't think the stages are all, I think there's some culturally bound stuff in there. And I think that not every stage is as predictable as he makes it sound. But the idea that people memorize the
Yeah.
stages, right? Like trust versus mistrust, because you take Psych 101 in college and you memorize them. But people don't understand the other side of it, which is each stage is like an essential question about myself, the world, and my place within the world. And I'm going to come up with an answer. So if it's trust versus mistrust, the question is, how safe is this world?
Mm-hmm.
Are adults going to be predictable and soothing and kind when I cry, when I have a dirty diaper, when I need to be burped? Like, are they going to come and talk to me and soothe me? Or is this world a really scary, unpredictable place? How good am I at things, compared to other kids, compared to what I want to do? Can I learn the things I want to learn and explore the things I want to explore or not? Right. And each developmental stage has those questions. And we're looking at what's the crucial question this child is trying to understand. And going back to that other situation when we talked about the kid who's being too loud, right? If the child's crucial question is, how do I make an impact on the world? How do I make my needs known? How do I get attention? Which I don't know why we demonize this. Oh, she's doing it for
Right.
attention. Okay,
No, yes, she is.
give her some then. Yeah. Okay, that's a fundamental human need. So therefore,
Mm-hmm.
um, so okay, how do I get attention? Maybe that's the crucial question. So then my job is very simply to say, that's not how to get attention, but this is how to get attention. Right?
Mm.
It's simply trying to figure out at each developmental stage, what's the crucial question this child's trying to answer, and then sort of creating an interaction with that and their temperament. So like I have a 7-year-old daughter who is more cautious by nature, right? And she's at that 7-year-old stage. Like, can I learn to read? Can I learn to like make my pencil move in the directions I want it to move, right? Can I learn to do a somersault or the tricky bars? It's all about competence. And by nature, she's cautious. So what does that tell me about her essential conundrums? And how do I help her through them?
Mm. Yeah. I love that because one thing I say a lot with families and parents and is that you're the detective. You have to be
Mm-hmm.
very observant, and I've even encouraged people to get notebooks on their kids and just write down what they notice.
Yeah.
How did they behave in this particular situation? How did they react to that and or that person or um, what were their feelings towards the end of the day versus the beginning of the day? Are they more middle of the day people? That there's just really important
Yeah.
to observe our kids because I do think we all fall into an easy way, not an easy, but sometimes we fall into this belief that, well, I did it this way with my first kid, it should work with my second kid. It's like, no,
Yeah.
no, they all come, like you said, prepackaged with a neurological wiring that's very unique to them. And and none of us can actually predict what sort of things are going to go into that making to create
Yeah.
that particular kid. So it really does become very good to just observe and
Yeah.
And
I love that analogy of a detective because very often when I do parenting work with parents, like they're coming into my office, I'll have them videotape an interaction with their child and I'll watch it with them
mm,
and sort of let's unpack what we see. Like, what do I see as, a child psychologist watching this with you? And not in a very, of course, counter shaming way. It's not what are you doing wrong? It's like, what skill can we develop together? Or are you noticing that here's what sets this child off every time. Like
mhm.
there's this factor that you're not even paying attention to because it didn't occur to you that that might be it.
Yeah,
But I, as an outside observer, can say, oh, look at that.
right.
She has a hard time finding words, and then her sibling comes home from school and gets exuberant, and then she gets super enraged. She was trying to tell you something, and she needed that time and space. And maybe saying to her, when your little sister comes home from kindergarten and she's very exuberant, it's not a great time to have a conversation. Here's a appointment card. You and me are going to go for a walk while, dad's watching the kids. If you have the luxury of a parenting partner,
Mhm.
and we're going to take a walk, and then you're going to tell me everything about your school day. And let's not worry about the fact that, you were trained that you're supposed to ask your kids how was their day within 5 minutes of
Yeah.
coming in and they're supposed to tell you everything. Like maybe that's not going to happen,
Right.
right?
Uh-huh.
And then, and then the child knows, okay, that's when I can find the words because it's unpressured because my 4-year-old sister who's so loud and exuberant isn't going to keep like, butting in.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about taking the time for the individual child because that definitely was I will say this. I went into parenting thinking that we were always just going to be together constantly and it didn't matter. We would all do stuff together, the kids would do stuff together, and it would just be, that way. And then,
Lovely, right?
yes, right. It was no problems. And then the same thing. Eventually I was like, oh, wait a minute. One kid really needs my undivided attention right now. And the same kind of a scenario where the younger one might have been a little bit more excitable, more outgoing, and then the older one kind of was like, okay, I just need you by myself for 5 minutes, please.
Yeah.
um, and then eventually, that rolled into us going to restaurants together because he really enjoyed eating at different restaurants. And then eventually it turned into going to coffee shops. And of course, as
Yeah.
both of them got older and it became more of a group event. But it was interesting to watch that unfold because in my mind, when I went into it,
Yeah.
I thought, oh, that will never be necessary because they're both going to get me as soon as they need me. And yeah, whatever. Those,
Yeah. And that wasn't even going to ever happen
no.
because they can't both get you as soon as they need you
Yeah.
if they need two different things at the exact same time because you're human,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
But then we
Absolutely.
beat ourselves up like, how can I, why wasn't I in two places at once?
Mm.
Because Elon Musk didn't invent that machine yet. Like, I don't know what to say.
It's just not gonna happen. So that's an
Right.
interesting way to consider it. I did with my, oldest, when we were sitting down to make his, like, educational plan, we set aside time for those sorts of things too, and I'm doing that with my youngest as well, and it just such a wonderful experience for me because even though I live in the same house with them and I see them all the time, there's just something about that one-on-one, no distractions, you're outside of the home comfort zone, and it's almost like you just get to see them in a way that you just normally don't get to see them. So it's really fun to do that, to step outside of the busyness of your day-to-day life and do something different together. Um, so let's talk about your podcast. Tell us how you kind of came up with that idea. Well, you kind of mentioned it at the beginning, but can you go into that a little bit more about how that became something that was important to you and what your mission
Yeah.
is with it now?
So, I am somebody who really likes to learn from other people and people who have expertise in a particular area. And when I was writing the book, there were just people who wrote books or who were doing research or were doing cool things on social media. And I felt like I'd like to have a conversation with that person about post traumatic parenting.
Mm,
So I realized the only way to do that is to start a podcast. And the podcast really just grew organically from that, where now I've been able to talk to Rosalind Wiseman or I just had some really great guests who I was able to ask them, I'd love this person's perspective on, post traumatic parenting or on trauma or on parenting, and it just grew from that. And then I started a YouTube channel because I would get really excited about the things that I was doing for the book, like things I was researching for the book, and I realized that I was trying to cram them into Instagram posts,
Mm,
and I realized that like, Instagram's really for short, fast, complete thoughts.
yes,
Like
definitely.
your kids don't trigger you; they reveal your triggers. Great, that's like a thought. But people have questions, and I realized that YouTube is really the place for, a 20-minute video just sort of expanding on the concept. Like you spoke about polyvagal theory. Tell me about what that has to do with post-traumatic parenting. Okay, great. That's longer than Instagram.
Yeah.
So I'm also trying to figure all the tech out because I feel like, once you're over 40, learning new tech is just like not as easy as if you're 10, you know?
Yep.
Just ask a 10-year-old.
You got to keep at it though. So you mentioned polyvagal theory, and I find that to be a very fascinating piece of information. I talk about it a lot. I write about that. Uh, would you like to share a little bit more with people so that they haven't heard about it before? Sort of what it is and how to interpret it and utilize it in day to day life.
So I think the most important thing to think about with polyvagal theory, if you really like distill it down, is that idea of, interoception and neuroception, that idea of, is a situation giving me cues of safety and calm so I can co-regulate with someone now, or am I in a shutdown, frozen state? And I think the most important thing for post-traumatic parents to know, because we tend to judge ourselves a lot, is when you're in a real dorsal vagal shutdown state where like, in polyvagal theory, you go through like a ladder of how safe you feel.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in that real shutdown state, it is unconscious. You are not like weak willing yourself into dorsal vagal shutdown where you're totally dissociated from what's going on around you. Your brain snapped you there.
Mm,
And for people to not judge themselves and to sort of work on like, well, what does make me feel safe and calm and regulated? How do I get more of that so that I can make myself into the parent I want to be? Really, it's not about the parent you want to be. Really, it's about the parent you want to be for your own internal children. Like it's you really have every right to do this for your own sake. But I think a lot of parents, especially post traumatic parents and especially female post traumatic parents, have this idea that we're supposed to be selfless and we're supposed to be all, sacrificing for our kids. So when I give people permission by saying, hey, if you do this, you will be a better parent to your kids. Like self care is child care,
mm,
they're one and the same. People are like, oh, okay, now I can sort of give myself permission without having that shaming voice say, like, oh my gosh, how dare you focus on yourself and your own feelings of safety. If you focus on yourself and your own safety, you're a better parent.
right, right. Well, that brings me to the post that you made, which is parents, in order to share your calm, you must first learn to protect your calm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
can you walk us through that? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. If you think about, the S's of attachment, the idea of like, kids need to feel safe and soothed and secure, that's all about sharing your calm. And if you don't have calm to share, then you don't have calm to share.
Hmm.
And when you look at it that way, and I think this happens mostly in the post-traumatic parenting book, we have 5 types of post-traumatic parents. One of those types is the entangled parent, and that's somebody who's like entangled in the drama of her family of origin, maybe an ex. I said her, but it could just as easily be his,
Hmm.
right? Or their. Maybe the drama of it, like an ex-spouse, maybe the drama at work or some friend group. So in terms of those entanglements, so let's say, your family of origin is a very boundary crossing family of origin with a lot of criticism and a lot of and everybody's got to like people please one person in the family, and it's just really stressful, and you go to this like holiday party, and then for the week before and the week after you're not parenting in accordance with your values. You're terse with your kids, you're stressed out, you're yelling at them, and you know that you're really mad at your family of origin, but you can't do it there. You just know you're spaced out and dissociated. There comes a point where you say, my kids need me as an attachment figure. I need to protect my calm. I cannot simultaneously be in this situation and protect my calm. Since I'm the only game in town for my kids, but I don't know, my family of origin's got a lot of kids and they can all be the sources of this
Mm.
emotional drama. I'm out. Or I'll stay for half an hour and then I'll leave. And maybe there are things that are unavoidable and you don't want to, cut ties with your family of origin, but you're going to be stressed out like 3 days before and 3 days after. So maybe you say to your parenting partner, like, you're the parent on duty right now. I need a lot of extra support. If I'm going to go to this holiday party, I need to know that, like, we're having pizza for dinner for the next 3 nights and,
Yeah.
taking off work for a day to just process because I need to restore myself. Or we can choose not to go to the holiday party. Like, those are the options. Because I think
Mm,
sometimes you can't. There are things you can't avoid, right?
I know.
It is
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
But knowing that, like, just lying to yourself and saying to yourself, yeah, no, I'll be fine. It's fine. It'll be good. It's fine. I'm smarter this year. I've done more therapy, so I get it more. Remember, polyvagal theory
Mhm.
says that when you go into a shutdown state, it's not conscious and it's not your fault. You can't snap yourself out of it. So protect your calm. It's
Mm.
your calm, but it's
Mhm.
such an important resource for your kids. And by the way, I have this every year on Instagram. Someone says to me, "How do I explain it to my kids?" Like, my mom is a boundary crosser and she will say to my children, um, "Tell your mom that you want to stay for the whole weekend." Let's say there's, like, I don't know, a family holiday weekend and, like, there's 2 dinners and there's tell your mom that you want to sleep over and you want to stay for the whole thing. Why do you only stay for the party 45 minutes? Tell your mom. And then the kid comes and is like, "Mom, why don't we stay for the whole party?" If you have that relationship with your kids, you can, in a developmentally appropriate way, say why. So I remember someone challenged me. It's like, how do I say my stepmother is a completely manipulative, narcissistic piece of trash person?
Yeah.
I'm like,
Oh, no.
sometimes grandma
Yeah.
uses hurting words, especially when alcohol comes out. So we're gonna come to the party and we'll stay until the alcohol
Mm.
comes out. But once the alcohol comes out, we don't want to stay in places where there are hurting words, so we leave while it's still pleasant and nice. You don't have to tell grandma that because grandma kind of knows, but that's our reason. And what you can say to grandma
Mm.
is, "This is what works for our family." And you have that same line. Like, I have this all the time. It's my best line. "This is what works for our family." And then I just rinse and
Yeah.
repeat. "This is what works for our family." Over and over again.
Mhm.
Eventually people get bored.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, 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 and stop trying to
yeah,
convince you otherwise.
yeah,
No, that's a great line because it's easy for kids to remember that, and it says a lot without saying a
yeah.
lot,
But that's how you say
and it
grandma's
gets
a manipulative, narcissistic, whatever the words were, right?
right, oh
That's how
my
you say that.
gosh,
You
yes.
say, "Grandma sometimes uses hurting words," right?
Right, right. Well, and there's so much to that conversation, that part of the conversation, which is that there are people in our families and in our lives who once we're starting to do the work, if you will, or really becoming more aware of the things that have taken place that have gotten us to where we are and where our nervous system is. And then when we feel a little bit more solid and stable, it's amazing how going back into a situation with somebody can almost unravel
Oh,
everything.
yeah.
And I can't quite remember who said this, but in a lot of my reading and research, it was something along the lines of our emotions are historical. So
Yeah.
they remember, we remember everything that happened before, even if we try consciously not to, and consciously try to get over it or deal with it or be better about it. It's still so difficult to not have everything flood you, especially if it was a really
Yeah.
contentious and difficult
I
relationship.
think I think
And
there's 2 things that I don't mean to interrupt, but,
no, no, go
there's
ahead.
the bumper sticker kind of idea is like, what's hysterical is historical, right? If you're having a
Mm,
disproportionate reaction to something, it's because there's history, there's so much that you haven't been able to say. The wound is so deep at this point. But there's also the other idea that, like, our family knows how to pull our strings and push our buttons because they're the ones who installed them, right?
mm, hmm.
So yeah. And
Gosh,
and
yeah,
yeah, and think
yeah.
about also the way our brains work is our memory is actually not encoded in our brain. We think it is, but actually our memory is encoded in objects, places, people, interactions. I remember when I was a kid, I used to cringe when my mom would meet certain, like, high school and, like, summer camp friends of hers. She would act like a kid. Like, they would start singing songs and, like, and I would be like, "Ew." But you know what? 16-year-old or 10-year-old mom was encoded in those friendships, and she's only like that with those
Mm,
people because it's a different version of her. It's a version of her I never met, right? I never met 16-year-old her.
mm,
So little wounded, self-doubting you is encoded in being around your stepmom. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, you go there and all the work you've done and everything you've done and like, where you've gotten in life, it almost unravels, not because it unravels, but because you're accessing a version of yourself that you haven't been in a long time. That version of you doesn't know your today coping tools because 12-year-old you
Mm.
hasn't met, 45-year-old you.
Okay. Okay. How about that? So is there a way to bridge that gap? I know it
Yeah.
takes time and I know it can't I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, there's
Go ahead.
IFS work where you really like update 12-year-old you and you say to 12-year-old you, like, I'm here. I'm an adult now. I'm going to handle it. Adult me is going to handle it. But I think a lot of it, this is going to sound terrible because it's not hopeful, but it is hopeful. A lot of it is that acceptance in like my AIM model of like accepting that certain people are going to make you feel lousy. And even if you handle it right and you use all your skills and you do everything exactly like you're supposed to, it still hurts. The analogy I once
Mm.
had that with my own therapist where I was around somebody who really had harmed me in my childhood. And by all measures of success, the interaction went well because I handled it like I'd used all my skills. I said exactly what I had intended to say. And I said to my therapist, like, I'm in so much pain. And she said to me, why? Like, you handled it so well. Like, she was like she was thinking that I was like beating up on myself for not handling it well when in fact I had. And I said, no. In my copious spare time, I actually I train in martial arts. I used to back then. And I used to teach self-defense classes. I said, imagine I get into a boxing ring with like a really skilled opponent. And we go 5 rounds and I win. Right? I do great. Like I use every skill. I win the fight. The next morning, my bruises are still going to hurt. But
Mm.
we take pain
Mhm.
as an indicator something's wrong. Right? So that acceptance of like that person is always going to make me feel a sensation of pain because painful, traumatized me is encoded with my relationship with that person. That doesn't mean I did anything wrong. Right? So I don't
Mm.
have to struggle
Okay.
against the pain. It's just pain. It is. It will pass. It's painful. It hurts. Yeah, it hurts. Pain hurts, and that's
Mhm.
okay.
And do you think that most of the time the pain is that a psychological pain anyway is about wishing something was
Yeah,
different?
I think a lot of this really comes from acceptance and commitment therapy, like Stephen Hayes' work, but the
Mhm.
idea that it's counterfactual thinking. Like there's a part of our brain, the trauma app is really trying to make it not be or make it come out different this time. Or it says, oh my gosh, it's awful. You're feeling pain. We need to do something about it. Whereas if we just accept, it's painful. It's allowed to be painful.
Yeah.
The pain will pass, then we're
Mhm.
fine.
Mhm. Yeah, I have found it very helpful to just name it, call it what it is,
Yeah.
sit there, but don't marinate in
Yeah.
it, and allow it to move through us, and just like emotional
Yeah.
waves, and it will come and it'll go, and maybe even each time you're in that situation, you just get stronger and stronger and more capable of not having that excessive pain after the
Yeah.
fact.
But if you do,
You
then you
know.
do. And or if something new occurs to you, sometimes as your kids age and they get to the ages where you were when you were traumatized, a pain reawakens. And it doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means perhaps you suddenly realize just how young 12 is, you
Oh
know?
yeah.
And that's fine.
Hmm.
But also, even if you have the strong reaction, it's almost like it's that predictable thing. It's like think of a fire drill. Oh, this loud noise. Oh, that just means evacuate. Okay. I don't like the loud noise, but
Hmm.
I can evacuate it. I can get more skillful, right? We can't, it's that idea of like, we can't change the water, but we can learn how to swim, we can surf, but we're still going to get wet, right? That's something we can't
Right.
stop.
Yeah. Yep. That's just, and that's that bringing forth reality. It is just what it
Yeah.
is, and once we can be conscious of that, it becomes something that is visible and seeable, and even something that we can do something about
Right.
it. um, so I wanted to switch gears just a little bit before I let you go, because there's another post of yours that spoke to me, because it's something I've said to myself and I've said to my children, which is teaching kids about the future self. And while I'm a fan of living in the moment and being aware of where you are and thinking about today and right now in this minute, I'm also a fan of making plans and thinking ahead a little bit not living in the future, because to me that's
Yeah.
stressful to always constantly be thinking about the future. Um, but it is helpful to aim somewhere, and it's helpful to put those stepping stones down into place. So when you talk about teaching our kids about the future self, can you explain to us what that means?
Yeah, so I really talk about future self in the context of trauma because a lot of times trauma robs us of the sense that there's a future self. Like we just think about the
Mm,
moment, but not in a living in the moment way, but more of an existing through the moment kind of way. Because living in the moment is
okay.
beautiful. But the idea of future self is I am always giving birth to future me. And I do always want to think about future me because future me is built upon the decisions of past me. So, what I do with my kids a lot when I talk about future self is the idea of like, if I, pre cooked all the meals of the week, at the beginning of the week, which I very often do because I just want to get it over with and then I don't have to think about it. I'll just say to
Mm.
my kid, just say out loud to model to my kids, thank you, past me. I am so glad that I'm so glad that I prepared the supper because now I can just pop it in the oven and it'll be ready soon. Right? So, like, think about it.
Yeah.
My daughter recently, she worked really hard. She wrote a children's book and, she worked so hard on it. And like everybody loved it. And like, she was like invited to like share it with like kindergarten classrooms and she won an award for it and she was
Hmm.
super proud of it. And I remember as she was working on it, she was like, it was hard for her and she was like yelping in frustration and it wasn't coming out the way she wanted it. And she kept like working on it. And then when she had all these accolades, I just tuned her into, can you thank past you for how hard past you worked and how hard she worked?
Yeah.
Because now you
Hmm.
get to go to these kindergartens and share your book with them because past you did a really good job and past you made this great decision that it's good, but it's not great. It's not exactly how I wanted it. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to tweak it and I'm going to work on it. And, I'm going to change it a little bit. I'm going to get feedback from people until it's what I wanted it to be. So, like, can you thank past you? Can you
Hmm.
because then you learn and my kids already know this. It's like, if we prepared for a trip the night before, they'll like sort of roll their eyes and be like, "Thank you past us that we can leave on time because we packed the picnic basket the night before." Great, roll your eyes, but do it, you know?
That's so
Yeah.
funny. We always have issues getting out of
Oh,
the
yeah.
house sometimes. Oh
Oh,
my
yeah, we
gosh.
do
Yeah.
too.
So that's really funny. Yeah, I've even had them say to me, "Okay, we're gonna do everything tonight. We're gonna get the car packed. All we have to do is get up and get in the car." I'm like, "Perfect. Let's make that a
Yeah.
plan." And inevitably something will happen last minute. Oh
Yeah,
gosh.
same.
Well, let us know how everybody can find you. I know we've already mentioned your post traumatic parenting podcast, which is available on the various platforms. Is that also on YouTube?
The podcast isn't, but I do have a YouTube channel called Post Traumatic
Okay.
Parenting.
Okay.
Which is really based on, when community members ask a question that is just going to take, more than an Instagram post to respond to, or something I'm interested in. Like when I was researching for the book, there was so much information that couldn't make its way into the book because you have a word count, you got to pick and choose
Yeah.
that. And I
Yeah.
get frustrated because I get excited about a concept. I'm like, no, why are we cutting it out? Okay, it can go to YouTube. Because this is a topic that I find endlessly fascinating, but also I it's so healing for me that I built the community I would have needed when I was a post-traumatic parent and I thought I was the only one who felt like my
Mm,
damage was going to damage my kids. So,
gotcha.
and then we
Yeah.
have the Instagram, which is at Dr. Koslowitz Psychology, where that's really where the post traumatic parenting community hangs out and where, people can interact with me, comment and, let me know what they're interested in. Also, like I've gotten so much insight from the post traumatic parenting community. Like I'll put up a post and someone will give me another thought on it and it just opens my mind to like a whole new area that's like so important to talk about or think about. So I find that
Mm,
the creation of a community for me in my AIM model in the book, I have the last part of AIM is it's acceptance, integration, and meaning. For me, that was making meaning of what I went through, like that I created a
yeah.
community, you know, that I
Right.
would have needed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Turning pain into
Yeah.
purpose.
And I
That's
can say the
amazing.
book is forthcoming from Broadleaf Books in 2025. I don't have an exact release date yet, but obviously on all the platforms, I'm going to let people know when it's available for pre-order. Like I just cannot wait for this book to be out there in the actual world.
I bet. I'm
Yeah.
excited about it too. It's a
Oh, yeah.
birth. It's a huge
Next
birthing
child.
process. So, and I know, didn't you recently just submit like the third section or
Yeah.
third chapter
It
or
was
something?
it was
Yeah.
written in 3 sections because nonfiction books, they want you to, like, sort of give them an outline and then you write it's not like a fiction book where you're supposed to give the whole novel in. They
Yeah.
want input. The editors really wanna, like, see it chapter by chapter. So I handed it in section by section, but part 3 is the last
Okay.
part, and it is not only in their hands, but they sent back edits. I did the edits, and it's back in their hands, so we're, like, practically there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Great. Thank your past self
Oh,
for
yeah.
all that hard work.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, past me, right?
uh, that's right. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's such deep, important information, and I really feel like this time, particularly this time in history, people really do want this
Yeah,
information. They want to know, they want to understand their bodies, they want to understand their minds and how all these things are connecting to create their
yeah,
experience, and how thoughts influence us and how our emotions influence us. And I feel like this is a really good contribution to that
yeah.
conversation. So I appreciate it
I
very
will
much.
say that, I feel like post-traumatic parents are like, nature's disruptors, and
Mm,
that's one thing I really see in the homeschooling and the unschooling community are people who are willing to think outside of the box for their kids. Um, and you tend to meet a lot of post-traumatic parents who are really transforming their trauma into a superpower in those communities
mm.
because they're willing to do something that other people are gonna judge.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point because there is a lot of judgment out
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Are there any sort of parting words that you would like to just leave families with, especially if somebody's listening to this who is in kind of the throes of parenting, particularly at the beginning, or maybe at any point? Now, let's just not even clarify a time frame, and they're just like, where do I go to get more information in order to just feel
Yeah.
like I'm getting my feet underneath
So I
me?
feel like what I want anybody who's listening to this and is thinking, like maybe I am a post traumatic parent, is that you have to know that it's not you. The things you're doing in parenting that you really don't like, it's likely not you, it's likely your trauma. And when you come
Mm,
from that position of where did I learn that? Like, why do I yell when my kids do this? Or why do I dissociate when my kids do that? If you go back into your trauma, there's likely a reason. And that takes away that whole onus of shame, right? Because if you learned it one way, you can learn it another way. And it's just about learning it. And we all can learn. So, and that's really what therapy is, right? Therapy is just an instance of specialized learning. So do that because you owe it to yourself to not feel that sense of shame and guilt and I'm parenting all wrong. Okay, that's where you're starting. That's not where you necessarily have to end. And there's so many resources out there on our trauma journey because not everybody can do therapy. There are books, there are journaling practices, there's a lot of resources to at least get you started on that journey. But no, it's not you, it's your trauma.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about guests on the podcast and to stay up to date on how they are showing up to make the world a better place for children and families, please check the show notes. To become a part of the great educational awakening and to keep up with my latest writings, offerings, and workshops, be sure you're signed up for my Substack newsletter. You can also follow along on social media at Let 'em Go Barefoot. That's LETEMGO Barefoot. If you are new to homeschooling, new to unschooling, or are simply unschooling curious but not sure where to start, we now have a beautiful 43-page downloadable guide that walks you through the how and why of self-directed education and child-led learning, as well as responses to common questions and concerns around academics, motivation, college, community, and more. You can find a link to purchase your copy in the show notes. Thank you so much for your support. As always, stay curious, stay connected, and stay aware. Until next time.